We're back here at Freedom 21 Santa Cruz. I'm Michael Shaw, and I'm here with Peyton Knight, who I believe is on the line. Peyton, are you there?
Absolutely, Michael. How are you?
Well, great. And I want to give you the Hero of the Day award because in Warrenton, Virginia, it is now midnight.
That's right. I'm sleepwalking right now.
Yeah, it's tomorrow already, and here we are still dealing with the evening on the West Coast. But the message you have coming from Washington, D.C. and its environs is so critical for people across the country to come to understand, because these 1,000 points of darkness that I constantly refer to show themselves in a very dastardly way with this program that we're going to discuss tonight, the National Heritage Areas. And this is really a format, as we get into it, that's being repeated with all kinds of federal programs designed to take the landscape of America and pull it and yank it out of the hands of American people and put it into the hands of either government or its eco-environment major corporations like the Nature Conservancy, etc. But to get started, tell us what a National Heritage Area is.
Okay, well, these are basically federal grants that are given to green groups or preservation societies who then work in partnership with the National Park Service to basically transform an area into, or actually bend it to its will and make it basically come into its idea of zoning or land use over a period of time, basically. The biggest danger with heritage areas is that a lot of congressmen don't really understand what they are. They see them as simply just pork that they bring back to their districts. Well, in reality, what they're doing is they're granting millions of dollars to, say, a group like the Nature Conservancy or the National Trust for Historic Preservation to basically team up with the Park Service and then lean on local governments to basically implement new zoning rules that restrict land use, that trample property rights, always in the name of preservation, whether it be historic or cultural or resource preservation, doesn't really matter. Pretty much every single heritage area that exists today, there are 27 of them right now, has a management plan, and every single one of those management plans...
Peyton, hold that thought for just a second.
Sure.
I'm sorry, I'll be right back. This is Michael Shaw. I'm back at the Freedom 21 Santa Cruz radio show with our special guest, Peyton Knight, who has been describing for us the national land grab that's called the National Heritage Areas. It's a circumstance where Congress doles out money that ends up in the hands of the Green Movement, and then it gets used at local levels to trample property rights and in effect a grab of land, and they do that by mandating specific local zoning ordinances and the like. With that, pick up, Peyton, and tell us some more.
Well, really what it is it's more or less a federal zoning scheme. Now, the federal government isn't exactly coming in and mandating land use policy for a local area, but what they are doing is they're giving millions of dollars to a green organization through the Park Service. The Park Service administers the program, and then that Park Service green conglomerate basically leans on the local government to pass ordinances that reflect whatever narrow vision of land use that green organization has. So it's really very insidious. It's very hard to tie it back to the heritage area. Like when a heritage area descends on a local community, all of a sudden you've got smart growth and you've got sustainable development. You've got all these things, and you're saying, well, you're looking around and you're saying, well, where did we go wrong here? In the past 10 years, all this has happened. Well, if you go back and see when the heritage area actually came in, it starts to make sense.
Well, give us a true life example somewhere around the country where a heritage area has been applied, and how it is that the people in those areas became affected.
Well, like I said, it's so insidious. There's no way to tie it exactly back to the fact that it's a heritage area. But if you look at every single management plan of the 27 existing heritage areas right now, they specifically direct the Green Group and the Park Service to preserve everything that is remotely unique to that heritage area, whether it be whatever they call cultural resources, natural resources, historical resources. Basically, they are given money and power to run roughshod and influence these zoning decisions. And that's the real danger, is no one really knows or understands in the local community what's going on. They just know that their local zoning board has changed, and usually it's the result of the heritage area.
Wow. Name some areas that have become labeled heritage areas.
There's a heritage area this is another important thing to understand too. It's mostly an east of the Mississippi thing. There are already so many land use controls that Greens use out west. You know, the Endangered Species Act and others. This is an east of the Mississippi land use mechanism. Most of the 27 heritage areas exist east of the Mississippi. There's a heritage corridor in New York. There's a couple in Pennsylvania. There's one in Georgia, Louisiana. We've got one in Virginia in the Shenandoah Mountains. It really is. It seems to be an East Coast phenomenon, and as such, it's flown under the radar screen.
Well, you know, I have done some study this week on this subject, which I was not very familiar with, being a Westerner. But as the more I studied it, the more I saw that it was really the same kind of program we see out west with critical habitat designations, or species identifications, or conservation easements, or we have in Santa Cruz, we have what's called the UIC ordinance, the International Fire Code ordinance, which ends up bringing all kinds of centralized powers over rural areas. And it always is done the same way. Monies come out, they fuel the operators that push for this attack on private property, and one by one they're making their achievements, and one by one industries or landowners go down, and of course when we're all done with that, the people living in the cities are going to find that the resources that have made this society great will now be in the hands of a centralized, at least national, if not international, consortium that is going to rule the nature of how it is we lead our lives as we move into the next decades.
Exactly right. I mean, all these are basically tools toward one goal, and that is controlling our lives and controlling our property, and through controlling our property, controlling our lives. Now, you said heritage areas are just another piece of the puzzle.
You made mention earlier that Congress just doesn't understand this. Now, I know you've testified before Congress on this subject. Explain to us a little more what you mean by Congress doesn't get what they're doing.
Well, the program has existed for at least 2 decades now. Actually, I shouldn't say the program, because there is no Heritage Areas program. All 27 Heritage Areas in existence right now exist in and of themselves. Just there are 27 separate bills that were passed to create a heritage area, and there's no real program for it. I don't know who first decided this would be a good idea and to funnel pork back to his district, but that's how it exists right now. What Congress wants to do right now is actually coordinate the idea of national heritage areas as a program and really allow it to just take off and basically consume what could possibly be every square inch of the United States.
Wow.
Now, Congress doesn't know what they are because there's only 27 of them, and they see them as basically just honorary designations. That's how they're billed by their proponents. For instance, there's the Oil Region Heritage Area in Pennsylvania. Well, this is the story of oil in Pennsylvania you know what, the rest of the nation really needs to know about this. Here's $10 million to you, Green Group. You set up a little museum about oil. Park Service will give you assistance and backing, and that's great. That's what Congress thinks these are. Innocent, unconstitutional little expenditures, of course, which is just pork. Something they can point to come election time and say, I brought that back to you, vote for me. But in reality, what you're doing is you're giving $10, $15 million to an ideologically green group, and you're directing them in their management plan to preserve everything in sight in the heritage area that they possibly can. Now, they don't have governing power, so what do? They take their $10 million and they lobby the local governing board and the local zoning board to start enacting ordinances that meet their goals. That's how these things work. Congress doesn't understand that. They're starting to understand it, and people are starting to understand it. People are starting to stand up and say, no more.
Well, you know, the way I see that is monies are granted by the Apex agency. In this case, it's the National Forest Service. Is that correct?
Right. It's actually they're individual expenditures, and the funds are actually dispersed through the National Park Service.
So the National Park Service, I call the Apex, you know.
Okay.
These aren't elected officials. The Apex Soviet hands out the money to their friends at the local level who carry a lot of political clout and a lot of money and put a lot of so-called local input into their programs, which are cookie-cuttered from county to county, presented to elected officials who then approve it because there's a political machine behind the organization that's bringing it to them. Meanwhile, the people know nothing about it, and the property owners aren't even notified that these onerous zoning regulations are going to come their way. Really, it seems to me it's a methodology for fueling the undermining of private property.
Absolutely. It's a sham. And that's a great point you bring up about notification. That's something that I argued and other folks that I work with who are concerned about this argued for, was simply, you know, if you're going to do this, if you're going to sweep in and draw a boundary around a local community, a boundary that has consequences for the people that live within it, you ought to at least mail them a one-page letter saying, hey, heritage area coming, thought you might want to know. Instead, they argue vehemently against that. They say that it's an administrative problem. They can't possibly notify everybody in there. Get this. They said, they told me, basically, the resources staff, Democratic resources staff, made the ridiculous claim that how could we possibly find the address of everybody who lives within that heritage area, as if that's impossible because somehow we all get our tax forms every year when we have to pay taxes. I don't know how they ever find our addresses. I don't remember ever signing up for that. But it's absurd the lengths they will go to spring these sorts of designations on unsuspecting local communities and not give them a chance to even voice their concern or find out what's going on before it's too late.
Well, you know, in Santa Cruz County, you can go down to the county department and they've got maps that'll tell you everything that lives and grows on your property, but somehow they can't come up with your address when they're about to take it by form of regulation. It does seem a bit contrived, especially when substantial dollars are flowing out to the people and organizations that are responsible for the creation of all these rules. Well, one of the other things I noticed, and which I certainly see here in California, I hear it from people all around the state in different counties who say this program or that program initiated either state or federal level has come into our community, and yet we're going to be a locally grown. We're going to have a locally grown dynamic here, and the result of it is that we're going to have increased tourism to our little place, any place, anywhere. It seems that everybody's being sold the same goods. That if you accept these regulations and accept these rules, you'll have a boon in your tourist industry in your county.
That's exactly right, and that is the number one mantra behind heritage areas is that, hey, we're going to give these depressed local economies, the tourism dollars are going to flow. We're going to tell this story about our oil or our coal in the coal heritage area, and people are going to come visit from miles around and vacation here all of a sudden and start dumping money in our streets. Of course, that's all a lie. these are land use control mechanisms. They impact how property owners, store owners, companies can use their property. And when was the last time that onerous land use regulations ever spurred economic growth? No, they do the exact opposite. They kill economic growth. And that's exactly what heritage areas do.
Wow. If you want to deal with, listeners, these kinds of issues in your community, one of the best ways that I think has been developed so far is to circulate the pamphlet called Understanding Sustainable Development, Agenda 21, a guide for public officials. And in this you get a short synopsis of the essence of the nature and the nature of the practice of sustainable developers, and they use the same kinds of tricks everywhere. So once you see the general MO, you'll be able to identify it in your community. And of course, there's so many people involved in it who don't have an evil spirit, are going along because, well, that's what Agenda 21 looks for. It looks for group thought. It looks for going along. But if people wake up, take the red pill, if you will, from our last show an hour before. Take that red pill and are willing to swallow the truth and learn the facts. This guide can be a very useful tool for you as an individual or for you working with others in your community to bring some sense to the craziness in our schools and in our planning departments and elsewhere. So if you want to see this, go to the Freedom21SantaCruz.net website, and you can call us at 831-684-2232 to order copies in a nice printed format of Understanding Sustainable Development, Agenda 21, a guide for public officials. Peyton, tell us a little bit about the American Policy Institute and what you do aside from bringing to the attention of the American people and to Congress what it is, the National Heritage Area land grab dynamic.
Well, we are a nonprofit 501c4 organization. We basically champion free market values, constitutional values, sovereignty, American sovereignty. We've been leading the fight against various UN treaties like the Kyoto Protocol and most recently the Law of the Sea Treaty, and also, of course, trying to get the United States out of the United Nations. And also we're very deeply concerned about what is becoming a rapid erosion of property rights through various things like heritage areas, Endangered Species Act, eminent domain, wetlands regulations. Basically, the property rights we consider the cornerstone of our freedom, and without them, we wouldn't have any. And people are really, it's the citizenry. It's not just Congress, but people really don't understand how important they are, and we're trying to turn that tide.
Well, Americans need to come back and realize that we have rights to our property, and we have property in our rights. And it's that second part that makes, if you contemplate, makes you understand that without private property, you're not going to have a private life. You're not going to have private liberty. And so as privacy in the context of property goes, we're going to find privacy in all aspects of our lives eroded if private property is squashed the way our federal government and in this state anyway under the Schwarzenegger regime as well as the Gray Davis regime before him, private property, the smart growth element and the Wildlands Project is moving so hard and so fast, and yet more and more people are starting to see that this is one cute little program that's lured a lot of people into it with its big money distributions, its global reach, and with that, cases are going the right way in many contexts in the courts, and more people are awakening, and when that really hits a critical mass, boy, watch out, America will become the land of potential instead of the land of submission. Peyton, we have a caller on the line, Roger from Pennsylvania. Roger, are you with us?
Yes, thanks, gents. I wanted to ask, it's like the taxpayers are getting pawned off on everything but maybe the Ernest Klump birthplace, that is the inventor of the carousel toilet paper dispenser. And, George Washington's birthplace is one thing, but even there, isn't there a way to sell to press that anything, such thing desirable to be preserved, that it's self-sustaining on those tourist dollars? And if not, that's the public's way of telling us that they don't think it's worthy of being preserved.
Well, there's another way, Roger. I'll cut right in on the answer to this one, because I think there is another way. It's not just market dynamics that could preserve something. It certainly ought not be government's interference that preserves it, because that mucks up the whole mess. If I want, or you and I want, or somebody else wants to preserve something, you buy it, not with coerced dollars, but with your own dollars. Not every purchase needs an economic model to satisfy the buyer. So if the green movement were being honest with itself and wasn't relying on coerced tax dollars to steal property, in effect, from landowners, but instead went out without utilizing regulatory abyss to beat down a price, but just went in and said, we'll pay market price, but we're not going to perform market functions on this property, we'd have a system that would work. And if we took all the monies that otherwise well-intentioned citizens are giving over to the green organizations and put it to not political organizations, but organizations that were really doing what they said they were doing, the system would work not perfectly, but so much better. Human beings aren't going to design the perfect system. We need a system that has the flex and flexibility that allows people to have their inalienable rights protected, while improvement is allowed to occur one step at a time. Do you have something to add to that?
Well, yeah, that's absolutely all true, and I think what Roger's saying is also true when it comes to heritage areas, is that, especially in this case, proponents say, till they're blue in the face, that these are locally driven initiatives. The locals all want them. Why would you deprive the locals of what they need? They just need $10 million in federal dollars just to get started and get tourists, flourishing in their communities. And the fact of the matter is, locals don't even know what's going on. And the fact of the matter is, these aren't touristy areas, simply by the fact, like he said, no one's putting their money where their mouth is. No one's crying for this. The only people crying for this are the people who want to control the area and the people who want the millions of dollars in government money. Those are the only people. If the locals really wanted something like this, then the locals would elect board members who would give them something like this and spend their money on it and spend their own local tax dollars on it. Instead, they want to raid your and my pockets to put, an oil heritage area in Pennsylvania or another one in New York. It's ridiculous. But that's exactly right. That gets back to local government. Local government does terrible things all the time, and we have a hard enough time fighting, bad proposals on the local level. But this is the Park Service getting involved. This is federal money. That is very difficult to fight. The citizen finds himself on the wrong end of the stick here with a regulation that basically stems from a federal grant or program that's administered by the Park Service. You've got to be a millionaire with no job to be able to fight it. That's the real danger here.
Well, thank you very much for your call, Roger.
God bless you.
Peyton, I've always been a little confused, and maybe you can help straighten it out for me, the difference between a heritage area and a heritage site. We've got about a minute to the next break. Can you give me a synopsis of the difference between heritage areas and heritage sites?
It's really minutia is really what it is. Heritage areas are heritage sites, or I think you may be talking about historic sites, national historic sites.
Well, I know much of California has a heritage site designation placed on it by the United Nations.
World Heritage Sites.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, yes. National heritage areas are basically they're more or less units of the Park Service, and they are designated by our Congress, voted on and designated by our Congress. World Heritage Sites I hear the music.
Got a few seconds to go.
Okay, World Heritage Sites are designated by the United Nations. Now, National Heritage Areas are obviously red flags to the United Nations, basically, of areas basically that they may want to designate as World Heritage Sites. In fact, in 1994, when Joel Heffley first introduced National Heritage Areas bill and wanted to create a program, he put something in that bill where the Secretary of Interior could basically designate at her whim, or his or her whim, a National Heritage Area as a World Heritage Site for the United Nations. So there is some overlapping there.
Wow. Now, Joel Heffley is a Republican from Colorado, is that right?
Right.
Well, you know, it's clear that this does enjoy bipartisan support, meaning simply that we got a Congress that is willing to trample the Constitution, willing to trample private rights, and willing to trample individual liberty and the prospects for an improving America. Because there's no way that using historical features, designating broad expanses of land as national heritage areas, and then begin the promotion of a local system of imposing massive zoning regulations is something that can benefit anybody, but ultimately the narrow elite that stands behind the global sustainable development movement.
Yep, absolutely. In Congress, yeah, exactly. Congress is all behind it. Most of Congress, because they're ignorant. They don't know or understand what these things are. They just hear, yeah, I'm giving $10-15 million to this group that's going to do something in my district. That sounds great. That's pork. I want to send it back there. I want to be able to point to it at election time and say, I brought $15 million back for this. That's how irresponsible many in Congress are. And it's just a very sad commentary on how far we've fallen, I guess.
Well, you know, these dollars, it seems as though the American public has accepted the attitude that it doesn't matter how many more dollars the government spends and the government takes in, and since it doesn't matter how many dollars it spends, it doesn't matter what it spends it on, and so as a consequence, we've got our land being stolen while our country becomes bankrupted. That's a collision course that's not going to serve any of us ordinary people very well, and gives rise to the comment, the quote from Thomas Jefferson that was read in the last hour, that if we turn this over to the money interests and watch inflation and deflation, which are functions of spending priorities and spending policies, occur, we're going to find ourselves without anything. And,
you might say it's unsustainable. And that's the great irony here, is all these sustainable development policies that cost millions of dollars, that destroy our economy, that absolutely hold back entrepreneurs, and ultimately, when it comes right down to it, not sustainable.
Not sustainable. I think that's
not for our freedom, not for our economy, not for our privacy, our property rights, or the way of life that we currently enjoy in this country. It's just not. And it's slowly tearing it down, regulation by regulation, policy by policy, boundary line by boundary line, and sooner or later there's going to be a massive backlash, and hopefully it's sooner.
Well, we certainly hope that the awakening happens before the fall occurs, because when we go off that cliff, we'll know something happened. And of course, the government will be there with a soup bowl and promising to be our friend. But the better solution is we come to grapple with the problems that have been created over the last decades, and begin to unwind them, transition the transformation away, and restore the American vision that has an ultimate and deep-seated respect for the rights of each individual, the equal rights of each individual. And of course, that's what goes away with national heritage areas and sustainable development programs generally, because it has no regard for the individual, his property, his liberty or his life. And so what we see when we hear these grandiose statements about marching democracy across the world so that freedom will reign, the kind of freedom that the President talks about, meaning to mean that you have a civil right to have a home, or you have a civil right to have an education, is exactly the inverse of what respecting individuals leads us to, because we don't have the burden by law to take care of our brother. We do that because of benevolent instincts. And when government takes over that function, we all end up to be objects of its tyranny, and that's that's how the 1,000 Points of Darkness achieve its global takeover. And these heritage areas, for the people particularly who live under them, they find their rights just regulation by regulation being stripped away.
Exactly. It's truly a socialist scheme. I mean, it's not based on the individual. It doesn't have to do with people deciding what's the best use for their property or their money or their lives, really, in general. It's people planning these things for them. It's a socialist planning scheme. And that's what's great, actually, about Freedom 21 Santa Cruz and your group, is when people property owners confront these minor inconveniences. For instance, they can't build a deck on their backyard because it violates some ordinance, or they can't build a shed or a barn in their woods because it's considered a wetland, even though water doesn't even collect there when it rains. You know, when people are confronted these minor inconveniences and they just kind of throw up their hands and say, "Oh, well, that's life. I guess I got hosed on that one." It's great that your group is confronting these people and letting them know, hey, you know what, that's not life. Let me tell you why that is. Let me tell you how that happened. Let me tell you who's behind that. Let me tell you who just inconvenienced your life or, made it impossible for you to carry out whatever you wanted to do on your property. People have to understand that these aren't just random ordinances or crazy laws that they're running into that don't make sense, but they're orchestrated for a purpose. And that is to basically run you off your land or prohibit you from doing anything that some green zealot doesn't think you should be doing on your property.
Well, and of course that green zealot is really working for the international money machine, the public-private partnerships that are taking control of resources and of human beings, and in people who are somewhat innocently think they're defending wild nature while stripping property away from fellow Americans, are doing nothing other than serving the corporate interests that they fight so hard or argue so hard against. And that's the clever tactic that the sustainable developers have been so successful at using, which is to take the left-wing collectivists and the right-wing collectivists and work them together to promote collectivism.
Partnerships, like you said.
Yeah, it's those partnerships. So don't think you're saving the owl. What you're doing is setting up a world for the global bankers and Weyerhaeuser.
Exactly. You've got corporations basically cozying up to government, creating these partnerships, and in exchange, maybe they get first dibs on something. They get to edge out their competitors, and all of us lose our freedoms. And meanwhile, but it's a very poisonous relationship. They want to stress that it's cooperation. It's government and private industry working together.
Yeah, well,
it's not.
That's
government
that's
working
the intimidation
through private
of
industry to create as a means to an end, whatever that goal is, whether it's sustainable development, smart growth, whatever.
Yes. Well, Peyton, we have another caller on the line, Jeannie from La Selva Beach. Hello, Jeannie. Have you got a question for Peyton today?
Good evening. I sure do. Peyton, I sure enjoy your articles, so thanks for all your work.
Oh, thank you.
You mentioned historic towns or districts. How does this fit into the plan?
For heritage areas?
Yeah. Well, historic towns or districts. I know they're closely associated with heritage areas also.
Oh, yes. You're exactly right. In fact, it fits in, it dovetails right with the plan, because one of the big groups that really lobbies on behalf of this program and wants to create a heritage areas program because A, they stand to make millions of dollars, and B, they stand to gain a whole lot of power to put forth their narrow vision of zoning is the National Trust for Historic Preservation. This is a big group. They have their Main Street program, they call it. What they do is they target towns that are, where you've got century-old homes, small little streets, quaint neighborhoods, and they really target these places to draw boundaries around them and create heritage areas. The executive director of the National Trust for Historic Preservation is very close to this. She was one of the ones who testified before Congress to really push for the program. They're working the Hill very hard, trying to get it passed. Probably they're going to really try for it this year. So it's a big part of it. In fact, I think they're probably the biggest in terms of the preservation groups and the green groups and the smart growth groups. I would say the National Trust for Historic Preservation it may be the biggest proponent of heritage areas.
Because we had one town, Aptos, here in Santa Cruz County, and our supervisor there in that area, Ellen Peary, was really wanted that historic district or historic town for Aptos. Well, the people didn't vote for it, but they're still trying to get that through somehow. So it's very important. As I drive through the United States, I see all these signs, historic town, historic district, and I think, uh-oh, what's going to happen next?
Yeah, I think that is an Eastern phenomenon. When I go back east, I see that same thing. And
it is. There's a town in Connecticut that they put it before their board, and this is, everyone. I love it. I love an old Victorian house. I mean, it's great, but ultimately, this is not my property. This is somebody else's property. There's a town in Connecticut where they are actually thinking about passing an ordinance where, if I'm the owner of a house that's over 100 years old, a decrepit old house, and I want to knock it down and build a new house, I have to go post a notice on the front of my house, a public notice, and then there's a public meeting where all my neighbors get together with the local zoning board, and they all debate whether or not I should be allowed to do this, and then let me know if I have the permission of everybody on the street, as well as the local governing board, and then I have to wait another year for an application, a permit to demolish goes through and everything else. I mean, it's absurd. I mean, these are people's lives, their livelihoods, that are being controlled by, local officials and, the community, the neighbors. I mean, it's socialist.
Well, people have to come to understand that if a group of us can do that to Mr. Jones down the street, it's only a matter of time before it reverberates onto us. Because
exactly.
Just because we're not living in a historic house doesn't mean that our child may not get the job that they want because their attitude's not right. Once you can establish these kinds of rules of taking what's somebody else's, you can take anybody's anything. It just takes a bigger mob than yourself to be able to take away what it is you have. So if you're one of the takers, just remember you'll become one of the takees in due time.
That's an excellent point. Think about it. Do you think that there is anywhere in this country today where you can build an addition on your house, or put a front porch on your house, or maybe a deck of a certain size on the back of your house, and just do it and not have to get permission? Do you think? On your property? I don't think there is anymore. I really don't. Considering all the overlapping laws and regulations and all the variances you would have to apply for, you can't do that anymore. I mean, that's pretty amazing, I think.
Well, it is, and it's also amazing that you can't raise your child without reporting his whereabouts to the government, because they have a vested interest in making sure that your child is reared in the way the government wants it reared.
Yep. Get them out of the schools.
Yeah, so that's right. The question that comes, what do we do? What do we do? And leaving the issue of schools aside, because that could be easy in a summary sense, you need to get your child out of the influence of government schools and put them under the influence of yourself. Moms and dads raise children, and increasingly our schools, as was indicated by the little report I read at the beginning of this show, are being guided, directed, and influenced by agents of the state. It always reminds me of the early feminists who said, mothers, don't turn your children over to the state, and that's something that's been forgotten over these last 100 years. But the other thing, and what do you think? I want to ask you what kind of action needs to be taken by people to avert this, even if you're not directly affected, without taking the cause of somebody else. You're not taking your own cause, and you're not then taking the cause of liberty. But how is it that we do take action to avert this impending doom if it continues?
Well, I think the first and foremost thing, and I know it sounds a bit trite, but it's so true, is educate yourself and then educate your neighbors. You know, people have to understand where this stuff is coming from. They have to understand what it means. They have to understand why they're being inconvenienced, why they're being told what they can and can't do on their property, why laws and zoning regulations are changing. They have to understand where it's coming from. So, educate yourself and educate others. Obviously, the Understanding Sustainable Development Guide is a great one. It's a guide for public officials. And that's the other thing is, do not underestimate the power of attending a town meeting and speaking up against these sorts of things. Typically the only people who attend these local meetings are the people who are in favor of these programs, because they're the ones that call for the meetings and no one else really ever finds out about them. Everyone's busy. The rest of us are out there making a living, raising our kids. But go in attend a town meeting, bring a couple of your neighbors that you've educated, spread about the room, and raise your hand and raise a stink and say no. And don't agree with it, with everything they say, and throw a monkey wrench into it. It's amazingly powerful, and it's quite effective, and really it gives you an excellent chance of squashing the program.
Well, that's right. You just want to maintain your cool, keep to reason, keep to the facts. And these folks eventually just have to fold up and go away. And yet there are so many meetings going on and so many little consensus councils, I call them the local Soviets, that you can't go to all of them. So I like to say, if you're not going to bring some wisdom to each of these sessions, and yet doing it from time to time is good practice, and it's good to bring others in because it alerts them. When you see those meetings operate as they do, and you're speaking with reason, those who are with you will come to their own soaring heights, because the contrast between the takers and the defenders of liberty becomes very clear in these meetings. But if you've decided you've had enough pain doing that for the short term, it makes sense then to continue and make sure that these meetings get recorded in some way. Because when you record, you can report. And when you report, you can distribute, or you can do one or the other. I like to say record, report, or distribute. Take your choice. And get out there and play the game of liberty. It's a whole lot easier to do it in the year 2005 than it was in the year 1776, and yet we have more at stake today than they did then.
Absolutely, and it's sad but true. But when these meetings take place, most of the time the only people there are the people who are in favor of whatever ordinance or regulation or that they're trying to get passed. They bang a gavel, they look around the room and say, any objections, any concerns? Everyone else turns their head looking around because they're all in favor of it. No one else from our side or from is there. And they just goes right through and they say, well, look, nobody objected. And you know what? They're right. No one did object. And, that the blame is really on us for not attending, bringing our friends there, and really taking part in what's happening in our communities. So, we do have a duty here. I mean, it's unfortunate that we can't just trust people to guard our liberty for us. We have to actually take an active role in it. And the very basic way to do that is to, get involved at the local level. Because if you get involved at the local level, you'll find that it's a lot easier to fight off bad things at the federal level as well.
Well, you know, the key is that the federal government is fueling the pocket of the local activists. And if you bring enough attention locally to that dynamic, you'll find that you can then, what we will find is that we can then elect people who make right policy rather than people who are looking for the handout for the feds for their agencies and for their buddy up partner corporations or their buddied up partner NGOs or their buddied up partner nonprofits. And that's who shares all these monies coming from the federal government. It's a small percentage of any community's population, but these are the guys who are running the town halls and running the county councils, and these are the guys that intimidate the heck out of us when they show up with their enforcement police and etc. But this is what we've got to do is make people understand, help people understand what the dynamic behind it is, just as you've suggested.
Exactly. If you can't wait to educate yourself when they're descending on your community, because by then it's too late. You've got to, try and stay abreast of what's going on so that you're ready when the time comes.
Yeah. Well, I think the one of the things that's on the verge of being understood by people here and in many places is that the problems that we may face in Santa Cruz or you may face in Virginia are problems, the same problems are being faced in every community across the country.
Yep, different names, different programs, but the exact same problems. You're exactly right.
Exact process. And our kids are being subjected to the same indoctrination by a federal education program. So we've got a federal government that is really centralizing power, and as I would proclaim, I would say that the concentration of centralized power, which used to be associated with the Democrat Party, has never been stronger than what it is right now under the administration of George Bush.
Oh, certainly. Absolutely right. Absolutely right. I've been terribly disappointed thus far, and I don't really see it getting a whole lot better, especially with heritage areas. I remember last year when we were testifying on the matter, pro-property rights groups, myself included, that very same day, President Bush's Interior Department put out a press release praising heritage areas and calling for a National Heritage Areas program. Just pulled the rug right out from under us. These are the folks that were supposed to be our friends. Gail Norton, she's one that we fought for Interior Secretary because she was a friend of property rights. And a lot of people voted for President Bush out west. I mean, these red states, these are the people who are getting killed, especially by the Endangered Species Act. They're having their farmland taken, their rangeland taken, their water rights taken, and they put him in office because he told them that help would be on the way. And here we are, 4 years later, we're into the second term, no help to speak of yet, and I don't see any on the horizon, unfortunately.
Well, he talks about an ownership society, but what he means by that is that if you go into partnership with us, we'll let you own something. So
it's ultimately government ownership.
Right, yeah. So there's one way or the other, Democrats owning it directly or Republicans owning it in partnership with those players who will play with them in that game. Either way, we end up with the loss of the unalienable right to the use, enjoyment, and right to dispose of our property, and that's the foundation for our private liberties and for our private life, for that matter. So, if you've been a New World Order supporter, I don't think you should be at all disappointed by the defeat of John Kerry, who was open about his desire to make America boundaryless and part of the world order. You should be very happy that George Bush is president, because he's doing a mighty good job under the radar screen of making these same programs happen.
Exactly. Now, he's there have been some minor tweaks and differences, and he's done a couple things decent. He's scaled back a couple land acquisition programs, and he's shot down a couple UN treaties here and there. But ultimately, what you've got is you've got the same terrible movement marching forward, just different party doing it this time.
Well, you certainly do some great work back in the Washington, D.C. area. I've heard reports about how some of these federal consensus meetings get their light turned on when Peyton Knight comes into the room and just speaks simple common sense and holds their feet to the fire. And how is it that people can become aware of this issue more thoroughly, and of your work on this issue and other issues for that matter?
Well, you can go to our website, AmericanPolicy.org. You can always give us a call anytime at 540-341-8911. We have a free email action alert system that is absolutely vital for anyone who wants to keep up on these issues, know who the players are, know who they need to contact, who they need to call, who they need to write letters to make a difference, and it's very effective. We want to make it even more effective this year. It's just a couple emails a month. Like I said, it's free. We don't give out your email address to anybody. We don't even want your name. We just an email address of willing patriots who want to stand up to the United Nations and sustainable development. And you can sign up by giving us a call, 540-341-8911, or just email us at apcmail@americanpolicy.org, or go to the website, americanpolicy.org. You can sign up there as well. It's truly effective. You'd be amazed what happens when we send out an alert on an issue, directing people to contact a certain congressman to voice their opposition to a bill, and his phone line lights up, his fax line, his email line, and all of a sudden he's not so in favor of that bill anymore. It's extremely effective.
Well, I know of a lot of cases where the American Policy Center has made a huge difference. You know, the battle really does need to be fought, not just on the local basis, but on the federal basis as well. And that's why getting notices from organizations like the American Policy Institute or the Liberty Caucus and EdWatch, organizations that we've had represented on this radio show in the past, just do wonders. And those numbers that you are helping organize in this regard need to grow. And so I'll encourage all listeners to check into the American Policy Center, get on your action alert system, and help inform those congressmen and senators back in Washington, D.C.
Exactly. We don't have as much money as the other side, but we do have strength in numbers, and not only strength in numbers, but strength in people who are motivated and willing to be heard. And that's why it's so vitally important that we, use that asset and make it as strong as possible, so we can counteract the hundreds of millions of dollars the other side spends trying to defeat us. So.
Well, they do spend hundreds of, I'd say globally, billions of dollars.
Oh yeah.
But we've got something stronger than money on our side, and that is truth and righteousness. Yep. And we've just got to organize that. It's not going to take care of itself. It's going to take human effort, human energy to bring that to the limelight. And of course, we are going to need some dollars to help spread the word, to be able to advertise in the right places and bring people to places like the American Policy Center or Freedom21SantaCruz.net. Well, we've got about 1 minute to go. I'm sure we'll see each other this summer in Reno, Nevada on July 14th through 16th for the Freedom 21 National Convention. And what might you have to say in these last 30 seconds or so to wrap up our show for tonight?
Well, first of all, it was great being on the program. And I would just encourage people to get involved. It's not as time consuming as you might think. It's just it's reading a couple articles here and there, finding out what's going on, and educating a neighbor or two, and that just does a tremendous amount of good in what we're trying to accomplish here.
Well, thank you very much, Peyton. It's now 1 a.m. back east, and have a good day tomorrow. And I want to thank you very much for being up with us tonight.
Oh, thank you. It was my pleasure, Michael. You got a great program.